So, can you explain the history of the system to me in a bit more detail?
Sure. This is the kind of thing you need to know about when you join the IADC board.
Obviously, one of our greatest achievements in the past 15 years or so.
Right. So it all starts in 2022.
Yeah, that's the bit I remember.
That's when the CO2 reward scheme was officially launched.
Pretty simple, huh?
Yes, essentially it is just a standard clause in dredging contracts that rewards tenderers who reduce their CO2 emissions.
Initially only for our projects, and then later for the entire footprint of a company?
Exactly.
Ah, got it.
Emissions were simply compared to what would have been produced with 2008 technology and fossil fuel.
Why 2008?
Because that was the year for which the IMO and the companies had reliable figures, a baseline if you will. The CO2 reward scheme started with 10% compensation for all emissions of the 2008 level. We are now already at 60% and tightening up things year by year.
And wasn't Estonia the first country to actually apply the scheme?
Well, Estonia was the first country to include CO2 emission assessments in a tender, but the first country to incorporate it in government regulations was Norway in 2023, but not all that much dredging there.
And then what happened?
Well, things started small with Ecuador and Korea, but then in 2025 the carbon rewards got a real boost when the EIB and the World Bank became the first to require it for any funding of dredging projects, followed by almost all other major parties who fund projects.
Right, and then the domino effect got going.
Yes, one after the other, all countries included it in their national regulations. There's only a couple left, but they are not particularly relevant, like North Korea, Andorra, Mongolia, Switzerland, not the sort of country with a big impact.
Whereas all major international institutions have joined the ranks. I mean, guys like the OECD, IMF, WTO, the Asian Development Bank, isn't that true?
Yes, which meant that lenders and investors included it as a requirement for the tenders in which they were involved. Until it has now become a provision in standard contracts everyone around the world is using. Like the ones FIDIC publishes. In fact, it was so obvious that the scheme solved the issue of the level playing field. Each country or region imposing its own emission reduction policy just didn't make any sense. And of course, no one could or even wanted to prescribe a specific type of technology or solution. Anyway, as one of the implementations of the Paris Climate Agreement, the reward scheme really got going. Some countries, like Ecuador again and the EU and Iran, actually have even more stringent reduction percentages and higher rewards for companies that go beyond those. It's like a flywheel.
Thanks for giving me the rundown, Jorne. To put it really simply, it is a standard clause in the dredging contracts that rewards companies who reduce their CO2 emissions.
Yes, and ultimately, it's the clients who pay for it.
That's a great IADC achievement indeed.
Yes, kudos to our predecessors on the board. They really managed to push all the right lobbying buttons. In the end, even in the US, the CO2 reward scheme is just a very clever system they managed to think up.